Hello, my name is Gina Patnoe from the Diabetes Self-Management, Education and Support Interest Group Leadership Team. I serve as the Early Career Representative. I'm joined by Mandy Reece, who serves as the advisor on our team. We're fortunate to be joined as well by two members of the Technology Interest Group Leadership Team who will be sharing their expertise. Today, we're presenting the first of a three-series webinar. The topic of today's webinar is how to grow your DSMES program with Person-Centered CGM Technology. And we thank you in advance for providing feedback at the end of the webinar. So here are today's learning objectives. First, identify current FDA-approved personal and professional CGM systems. Second, describe opportunities for personal and professional CGM billing within a DSMES program. And last, summarize the process for building a CGM service within a DSMES program. And I'm pleased to introduce our presenters. Dr. Akturk, Assistant Professor of Medicine and Pediatrics at Barbara Davis Center for Diabetes at the University of Colorado. Dr. McKee, Assistant Professor of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. Again, I'm Gina at the International Diabetes Center in Minneapolis and Melrose Center. And Sarah Mandy Reece, Associate Professor and Vice Chair at the Pharmacy Practice and Director of IPE at the School of Pharmacy, Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, Georgia. And here are our disclosures. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Akturk to share an overview of the current CGM systems on the market.
Thank you very much, Gina. So I will start with the personal and professional CGM systems. So we can classify the CGMs in many different ways. Now I will just start with the real-time CGMs. And so we can categorize the CGMs with the, again, real-time, intermittently scan one, the professional CGMs. The real-time CGMs that have FDA approval in the United States are Dexcom G6, Dexcom G7, and Eversense E3 and Libre 3. Intermittently scan CGMs are the Libre 14-day and Libre 2. And professional CGMs are the blinded CGMs are Libre Pro, Dexcom Pro, and iPro 2. And as you all know, that Dexcom G7 has recently got FDA approval and it's currently in the launching phase. And Libre 14 days has been discontinued by the manufacturer. So we will not be reviewing Libre 14 day. So we will start with the real-time CGMs. And as we start with the Dexcom G6. So Dexcom G6 is a real-time CGM. It's a 10-day sensor life. A 90-day transmitter, you are just placing on top of the 10-day sensor, and you are just using with them together. And sensor measures the interstitial glucose every 5 minutes and sends this all data with the transmitter to either your smartphone or the receiver. And there's a 2-hour warm-up. It means that in the first 2 hours, there is no results are available. And there are plenty of alerts and alarms in this CGM, and there is a rise and fall alerts, and there is an urgent low alarm, which means that if your sensor glucose at or below 55 milligram deciliter, that your CGM is going to be notifying you, and then so you can just make necessary changes. And this alarm cannot be turned off. And there is an urgent low soon alarm in Dexcom systems, which is unique to this system. So it means that it predicts the urgent low blood glucose within 20 minutes. So if your blood sugar is, going to be below or at 55 in 20 minutes, and you will be getting a notification before 20 minutes. So then it will give you some time to decrease the risk of hypoglycemia, and also it decreases the risk of rebound hyperglycemia that you may be overcorrecting. So this system is, as of today, compatible with Tandem T-Slim pumps, which is the basal and control IQ, and Omnipod 5 insulin pumps. And the Tandem Control IQ and Omnipod 5 are the AID systems that are working with the Dexcom G6. Dexcom G6 also has an iCGM in the category, as well as the Dexcom G7 Libre 2 and Libre 3. So the Dexcom G7 is currently launching at the end of February, and then is that recently FDA approved, and it has been in use for some time in Europe. And the differences basically between Dexcom G6 and G7 to highlight the sensor and transmitter is completely combined. So you see that there is a one piece only. And it is 60% smaller volume-wise and 30 minutes warm-up instead of 2 hours compared to G6. And there is a 12-hour grace period. So what does it mean? So it means that actually you can increase the sensor life about 12 hours or so when combining and transitioning to the next sensor. So it gives you some time that it's not going to die in the middle of the night, or if you are at work or if you're at school or somewhere else. It's also a great advantage that actually with this decreased warm-up time and with this grace period, if you are connected with an AID system, you can just use it a little bit longer. The sensor life is the same, 10 days, even though some longer sensors are in development. And sensor measures the same way the interstitial glucose every 5 minutes and sends to the results to the app or to the receiver. Rise fall alerts are the same with the G6, and urgent low soon alarm are the same with the Dexcom G6. The main difference in the alerts are there is a delay first alert system only for hyperglycemia. So which means that traditionally in all CGMs, that how the alarm system is working, as soon as you hit your interstitial glucose hits that number, let's say that you put it in 200, your CGM is going to be notifying you. But in this system is unique that you can actually delay that. You can say that delay the first high alert between 15 minutes to 4 hours, which means that it needs to be a little bit longer in that duration. It's not like if it's going 205, 195, 205, so it's not going to be notifying you immediately. So it can decrease the alarm fatigue. And if you know that already you will be high after a big meal, so you can just ignore that alarm a little bit. And when you think that it needs to be necessary changes needs to be made, then you can get notified. So it's a little bit more customizable. So if we go with the Freestyle Libre 3, and this is the only real-time CGM from the Abbott Freestyle Libre, and no scanning is required, unlike the other Libre, which Libre 1 and Libre 2 is, that these are the intermittent scan CGMs. So this is the smallest CGM, and this is the size of a 2 stacked pennies. And it's used with only a smartphone app. So there is no reader is available, and you have to use your smartphone, and your smartphone should be compatible with the system. And this sensor reads every 1 minute. It's different than the other systems. And then there's a 14-day sensor life. And it decreases in carbon footprint. It's a significantly smaller packaging and everything, like the Dexcom G7. So everything is getting smaller. And there's a one-piece inserter in comparing to Libre 2 that has actually 2 pieces you just assemble, but in the Libre 3 is just come with only a 1 piece, which is everything is loaded. And this is also the largest Bluetooth integration up to 33 feet. It gives a great range for the connection. So Medtronic Guardian Sensor 3 is the FDA-approved latest sensor in the United States. And it's a 7-day wear. There's a 2 hours warm-up and 2 calibration per day. And 3 to 4 calibration can optimize the accuracy. There are high and low alarms and follow systems like the other ones. And also it can be used with an artificial intelligence-based diabetes coaching system, which is Sugar IQ. And Sugar IQ is another app that you can use for coaching, and it can give you, based on your input, that it gives you some feedback for the food, that certain food when you eat, your blood sugar is going high, or when you do this exercise or during that time you are getting low, so you can customize things. And as of today, it can work with Medtronic 670G and 770G insulin pumps. So the last one I will review is the Senseonics Eversense E3 system. So as you may know that this system had already a 90-day sensor, and last year it got FDA approval for a 180-day sensor. This is the only implantable real-time CGM in the US. There is a 24-hour warm-up and readings comes every 5 minutes. And 1 calibration per day is the current FDA approval, although you need to do 2 calibrations first 21 days. And sensor powered wirelessly by variable transmitter, and you need to charge the transmitter every 10 to 15 minutes. So you basically tape that transmitter on you, and with a silicone taping, which is a hypoallergenic, and this is the only CGM with the vibrating alarms, which means that you can turn off the alarms and you can get notified for highs and lows based on the different tones of the vibration. So it can be an advantage if you don't want to be notified in a crowded environment, in a class or somewhere else. And you can get the notification by your smartphone, in your watch, or with the variable transmitter. And the sensor itself is MRI safe in most of the MRI, so it doesn't need to be removed because it's underneath the skin. On the other hand, you still need to remove the transmitter, which is that taping that's material. And no interference with vitamin C and acetaminophen in some of them can interfere. So, and I will be closing my part here, and I will be passing to Dr. McKee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be discussing intermittently scanned, or also referred to as flash CGM. So we have one such CGM on the market currently, as Dr. Akturk said, Abbott Libre 14 days being phased out, or is phased out. So Libre 2, just like its predecessor, has a sensor life of 14 days and a 1-hour warm-up after it's applied to the back of the upper arm. And the sensor reads glucose every 1 minute. It does still have interference with high doses of vitamin C greater than 500 milligrams, which could cause false high readings. But to put that into perspective, a multivitamin has about 60 milligrams of vitamin C. So you'd have to be on pretty high doses, not to say that we never see that, but to try to put it into context. Its accuracy is much improved from the 14-day version, where it had less accuracy in the hypoglycemic ranges. And it does have optional alerts for high and low blood glucose levels. So we teach our patients to scan with either their phone or the device reader about every 8 hours. And that's so when you see the tracing on the download, it's continuous. If the patient gets a low alarm alert, they'll have to scan in order to see that value. But it's important to say that even if the patient forgets to scan about every 8 hours and their glucose level falls below the low threshold or is high, they'll still get that alarm. If they have the app on their smartphone, the mandatory urgent low glucose alarm for blood sugars of below 55 is on there and cannot be turned off. So now I'm going to summarize what Dr. Akturk and I spoke about with regards to personal CGMs. So this is kind of a nice summary table of all of the available CGMs on the market currently in the US, and comparing days of sensor wear, being the longest, of course, is the Eversense E3, and the shortest, the Guardian 3. They all have various warm-up times that we talked about, Dexcom G7 being the quickest, 30 minutes, and the Eversense E3 taking a full 24 hours. They all have various alerts, that we discussed for high blood sugars, low blood sugars, signal loss alerts. And some of them do integrate with pumps. So as we discussed, the Guardian 3 talks to the Medtronic pump 670G and 770G in its own hybrid closed loop system. Whereas Dexcom G6 talks to Tandem in the Control IQ and Basal IQ functions, and also Omnipod 5. They all have smartphone integration. It's pretty, vast between the Android models, the iOS, and the Apple, products that are available right now. Some communicate even with the Apple Watches. And it's great because they all really allow for data sharing with family and friends. Some of them do have available separate receivers, and that's important if, for instance, the patient doesn't have a compatible smartphone. So they would want to be able to have a device read in order to get the data. And then I listed here interfering substances and radiation. So we now are utilizing a lot of personal CGMs. So we have to think about our patients when they go, for instance, for tests or surgeries, and how that might interact with their sensor. So for instance, electrocautery has really been shown to interfere with the sensor readings, and sometimes even post-procedure, the sensor doesn't really go back to its original state and isn't reliable. Because there aren't redundancy in the prescriptions, meaning if you take off a sensor before its full wear time, the patient often has to call the company for a replacement, so on and so forth. So we want to be cautious in taking them off, but also know when they're not going to be accurate. And that can also include with various medications, which I listed there. And for those of you who are looking forward to summer as much as I am, we put in the water resistance so that especially everyone can go enjoy swimming and so on and so forth. And now I will move on to talk about professional CGMs. So when to use a professional CGM, there are a lot of great instances where this is very, very helpful. So in the setting of patients with newly diagnosed diabetes and whom you're trying to capture some patterns right off the bat and get going with improving their care, this is very helpful. For individuals not using CGM, it's also very beneficial to put a CGM on a few times a year in order to really get a great overview of what's going on. The thing about finger stick or capillary glucose is there's just a point in time, but CGM tells a much more elaborate story, and so you'll be able to get a lot more information on your patients and be able to help them more. Certainly, if patients are having hypoglycemia and don't have their own personal CGM, this is really, really important for capturing nocturnal hypoglycemia, for instance. And for patients not on insulin and have type 2 diabetes who may not be able to have their own personal CGM, this is beneficial. And then we also have patients, and we see them frequently, who just aren't really sure they want to wear something all the time. They're not sure if it's going to be comfortable or bothersome. And so a trial of a professional CGM is sometimes really, really helpful. So here's a comparison of the various professional CGMs. So we have Medtronic iPro 2. So this is a 6-day disposable sensor, but the transmitter is reusable. So they actually have to bring the transmitter back so that you can download the transmitter and obtain the report. The results are blinded so that the patient, when they go home wearing it, they won't see any data, and they need to calibrate the sensor twice a day. In comparison, Abbott has their Freestyle Libre Pro, which looks just like their Libre 2 sensor. It's worn for 14 days, and it's just like the Libre 2. So it's the sensor and transmitter combined, and it's also blinded. No calibrations, and then the patient just returns the sensor, you download it, and can generate the report. Dexcom G6 Pro is kind of interesting. So it's still a 10-day sensor with a disposable transmitter, which is good. So you don't have to keep track of that in your office, but you can set it as being blinded or unblinded for the patient. And if you set it in an unblinded mode, so the patient can look at their G6 app on their phone, they can actually receive low and high blood glucose alerts or alarms. And that may be good. I think you kind of need to think about that in your office setting too, in terms of how you're going to triage potential phone calls or messages about it. But it is really nice for patients to also utilize that feature if you think that would be very helpful. No calibrations on the G6 Pro, and then the patient returns the device and downloads it or can share it on their smartphone via Clarity. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Gina to talk about billing for CGM services.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. McKee. So yes, I'm going to share about the different opportunities to bill for both professional and personal CGM to be able to expand revenue for your DSMES program. So there are 3 CPT codes I will review: 95249, 95250, and 95251. None of these are time-based, and they can be billed in addition to G codes if your clinic is providing DSMT. So first, CPT code 95249. This is used for personal CGMs. So it's for setup and training for a patient-provided CGM specifically. Training must include instruction on sensor placement and application, calibration with the monitor, training on how to use, removal of sensor, and review of that recorded data. This cannot be billed at the time of training because 72 hours of data must first be obtained. So you could bill 95249 when your patient returns with their device at a follow-up appointment. Some considerations. This code can be used once in the lifetime of each new device. So for example, even if you charge 95249 when providing training with a Libre 2, say your patient came back a month later and decided they want to try the Dexcom G6, you could bill this code again. Or even if they came back now with a Libre 3, because it's a new generation, you could use this code again, as long as it's documented clearly in your note that that device or generation has changed. So from my experience with this code and the other codes I'll talk about, it's really important to just have a general understanding of the code and when you would use it, and then work with your own coding team internally for specifics within your system, and as well just to confirm frequency of billing with different insurance plans. You'll note that this says that the initial visit must be face-to-face. I will say within our department, our coding team does allow a video visit for the initial visit. We just can't do a phone visit because you really need that visual piece for appropriate training. So the who can bill 95249? This could be the CDCES, RN, RD, or MA if it's within their scope, a pharmacist. So these people can do the billing. And then this code does specify that the service must be done, quote, under direct supervision of an MD, PA, or NP. So while the CDCES, for example, can provide the training and service, our department bills this under an on-site healthcare provider. We refer to this as the doc of the day. You can see on the right the minimum documentation that's required: patient name, date of birth, and MRN, indication for device placement. So this could just be type 1, type 2, or gestational diabetes, name and type of device placed, the time period the CGM was worn, and that signature of the healthcare provider. The national average reimbursement for this code is $59.87. So a lot going on here, but this is a sample of the template that we use at the International Diabetes Center when we're planning to bill 95249. So as you can see, we have templates for both the initial visit where that training is provided, and then also at the follow-up visit when the data is actually reviewed. And again, you can charge that 95249 code. You'll notice in our template that we do include time spent on DSMT versus on the CGM training. So again, the CPT codes are not time-based, but our coding team does like us to specify how much time was spent on each part so that we can justify that double charge being billed. In the follow-up visit, my team also includes the AGP and other relevant data from the CGM report. So next we have CPT code 95250. This is very similar to 95249, though specific to clinic or healthcare provided equipment, so the professional CGM in this case. The training should also include instruction on sensor placement and application, calibration with the monitor, training on how to use, removal of sensor, and review of that recorded data. And again, this also could not be billed until the return visit when 72 hours at least of data has been collected. For this code, since the clinician, of course, has to apply that CGM Pro, the initial visit must be face-to-face. And this can be billed one time per month, though I find it's not always reimbursed that frequently. And the WHO for this code is the same as 95249. So again, could be that CDCES, RN, RD, MA, or pharmacist. And again, consider billing it under that on-site physician. You'll see the minimum documentation here is also the same as 95249. And the national average for reimbursement for this code is a bit higher. It's $151.58. And here again is our team's sample template, just to give you an idea if you're building this in your clinic. You'll see we do have the added step of patient consent. And I know this is really common among several other diabetes education programs across the country. So this is just to ensure the patient understands how to proceed with the professional CGM, what expectations are. So you see that documented here. You also see again the indication and an explanation of the training that was provided. The follow-up visit template is pretty simple, just gives the dates that that sensor was worn. And again, we do include that AGP or other pertinent info from the CGM report. The final code to consider to expand revenue for your DSMES program is 95251. And this code is a bit different. This is used for analysis and interpretation of at least 72 hours of CGM data. So this could be interpreting data from either a personal or professional CGM. And depending on collaborative practice agreements at your clinic, it is possible that this code could be billed at the same time as 95249 or 95250. This can be billed one time per month, and a face-to-face visit is not required. The WHO. So this code can generally only be billed by an MD, DO, NP, or PA. However, other clinicians, such as a PharmD or CDCES, may be able to provide interpretation if you have a collaborative practice agreement. Again, this is dependent on state-specific laws. So for example, a CDCES could potentially interpret the data in their note and then forward it on to their referring provider. Then that provider could sign and note that they agree with the interpretation and actually charge that billing code. Here on the right, again, you see that minimum required documentation. Note that in addition to what was needed for the previous codes, this code requires a written analysis and interpretation of the data. And the national average reimbursement for this code is $35.30. And here is a sample template that our endocrinology group uses. So you can see here, the analysis is just a listing of some key metrics from the AGP, and the interpretation is a written description of some of the patterns that provider notes. So you can see this example reads post-meal blood glucose elevations, consistently elevated later evening through early morning, occasional hypoglycemia after morning meal. So it doesn't have to be complicated. A simple few sentences is just fine for that interpretation. And now I will pass it over to Dr. Reece.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gina. And I am just thrilled to finish off our presentation as my colleagues have presented wonderful information that you all can use. And I'm going to finish it up kind of talking about a couple of folks in different parts of the country who have successfully built a CGM service line within their DSMES program. Meet Rhonda. She's from Georgia. She is a diabetes care and education specialist. She's actually not in management, but she's on the team of diabetes care and education specialists. She's been working in this role for more than 20 years. And she actually began having access to CGMs probably 12 years ago within her DSMES department. And she had been doing lots of education with various providers, as well as care managers about continuous glucose monitors and the value of these monitors. And she basically, when they began using the CGMs, it was to align with their insulin pump services that they provided, downloading insulin pumps, talking about the findings with the patients, sending the reports of the data to the physician or the provider. And so when they started using CGMs, they really began with the insulin pump for folks that were using the insulin pumps. And so Rhonda had a real passion for CGM. She saw the value of it. And so she reached out to her manager for the diabetes education department at the time and just really shared her vision and her excitement. And her manager was very supportive of her vision. And Rhonda figured out quickly who to collaborate with in terms of, building this program. And one of the key players was the care managers who were actually embedded in the primary care practices. They were continually communicating with providers about closing gaps and providing services for their patients with diabetes or their persons with diabetes. And also another partner that Rhonda collaborated with were with the CGM companies. One in particular had really marketed their professional CGM version, and they were really marketing it to Rhonda and her team as well as the care managers. Gina did an excellent job in terms of talking about the specifics of the billing and the opportunities there for professional and personal CGM. One thing I want to point out here is that when I was talking to Rhonda, she shared that how with the professional CGM at her practice, they really offer blinded and unblinded, and they really give the provider and the person with diabetes the option of whether to choose blinded or unblinded data or ability to see the data. More often than not, as you would probably guess, folks tend to choose the unblinded version. So how did Rhonda market the services? Currently, they actually get their referrals by going straight to the providers within the primary care network. And oftentimes when that provider is sending in that referral for diabetes, self-management, education, and support, such a great opportunity, whether it's at the time of diagnosis, a person that's coming in for their annual diabetes self-management education and support, or maybe they're struggling with managing their diabetes and they're coming to see the diabetes care and education specialist. In terms of marketing, early on, Rhonda again had worked with the care managers, but also she had her manager for the diabetes education program go to the physician's offices in the primary care network and market what the services that they could provide. And in more recent years, in terms of marketing They've used the ambulatory care pharmacists who are working hand in hand with the person with diabetes as well as the providers, and using them to increase awareness about the CGM service line, as well as assisting with the implementation, really growing that within the primary care network. Of course, like with all good things in life that are worth doing and endeavors, we have challenges along the way. And awareness, Rhonda shared, had been a challenge because within her health system, there's been a huge explosion in growth in terms of the number of providers within the primary care network, as the health system has numerous different graduate medical education programs in terms of specialties, and internal medicine and family medicine in particular, a large increase in numbers. So just the challenge of keeping up with all of the new providers and making sure that they get education about the continuous glucose monitors, and then also provider education about the CGM interpretation. As Gina talked about in her presentation, really there's that opportunity for interpretation of the data. And so Rhonda's been working to figure out, how do you educate the provider so they understand how to take that data, what it means, and how to explain it to the person with diabetes, and certainly cost. I know, working with folks with diabetes, and I know my colleagues here today, we want all persons with diabetes to have access to CGM. And we're continuing to work through cost barriers that are actually present at this point in time. And I asked Rhonda for a couple of success stories, and she shared a couple with me. And one is particular, a person who recently was hospitalized for diabetes ketoacidosis. And they were sent home on multiple daily injections of insulin. They were a person with type 2 diabetes. And once they were on that basal bolus regimen, they were having significant low blood sugars, dangerously low blood sugars that were discovered by that continuous glucose monitor. Fortunately, the dose of the basal insulin was able to be significantly reduced. In the bolus, insulin was removed altogether. And now that person is actually doing really well. And Rhonda also shared, and I feel this is very profound, is for that person with diabetes who's able to wear that continuous glucose monitor, they're accountable to themselves, not to a provider that they feel may judge them or fuss at them, but they're getting information for themselves to empower them to manage their diabetes. Next, let's meet Lucille from New York. She is the manager of a diabetes self-management education program as part of a health system. She recently moved to a different health system, but I'm going to share her story of what happened in the previous health system that she worked in. Now, she began the program about 3 years ago, implementing a CGM service line as part of their department. And they launched it within the primary care practices. In their health system, they had certified diabetes care and education specialists embedded within the primary care offices. And so it was a golden opportunity to expand that and incorporate diabetes technology into the services that they were already doing. Now, Lucille, very passionate about diabetes technology. And as a director, she shared this with me, that for her, she wanted to make sure that her department was maximizing all the opportunities for outreach and access to persons with diabetes, improvements, and contributing to the improving the quality of care that the person with diabetes has, and then knowing that her department is also responsible for the financial side and opportunities for revenue streams, and growth of that revenue stream is absolutely important. And so Lucille, when she had this vision, spoke to the vice president that she answered to for her department. And they bought into her vision and her passion and what she wanted to do. And the next step was to really find a lead physician within the primary care group, the primary care service line, that would get behind this vision, that would buy into this vision. And there was one. He was well respected. He was a visionary, and she scheduled a one-on-one meeting with him and said, hey, this is my vision. This is what I see, and this is how we can help you. And it ended up turning into a real win-win situation, because he actually needed some help with mentoring of one of his advanced practice practitioners. And Lucille was able to assist with that. And so it started small. It started with this physician leader in his practice, and started providing the CGM service in his office. As other offices saw the benefit and the value added, which I'll talk more about in a bit, they bought into it and said, we want this service as well. As I shared earlier, fortunately, in Lucille's case, the certified diabetes care and education specialist was already built into the primary care network. Now, for her, beginning this service line is also making sure these certified diabetes care and education specialists were thoroughly trained in the devices themselves, the CGMs, making sure that they were comfortable with them, also making sure that they understood the data interpretation for the CGMs, because we all know it's not enough just to give a person a CGM, whether it's professional, you've got to be able to interpret that data. Same thing with personal, we can educate, but we also need to know how to interpret that data. So that was a big component of her implementation of the program. She, for the initial visit, they would use G codes, MNT codes. And then what was a little bit different about Lucille and her team's approach is they would bring folks back about halfway through wearing the professional CGM. So for Dexcom, they would bring them back after about 5 days. For Libre, they would bring them back after 7 days. And they would talk with the person about their data, what they're seeing. Then they would identify what behavior changes does that person want to make. Then the person with diabetes would go make those changes, those lifestyle changes, and then come back in for that visit. And at that visit, talk about the impact that lifestyle change actually had on their diabetes management, their glucose. Such a powerful opportunity. And talk about growing revenue streams across the whole system. Lucille and her team encouraged the providers to bill for the interpretation, that 95251, for them to bill for their interpretation, because we all have a role in the CGM, in the provision of the services. In terms of marketing for Lucille and her team, it was truly at the practice level. So they had flyers put up within the practice, and the flyer said things such as, new service in this practice, ask your provider about the diabetes care and education specialist. There were reminders that Lucille and her team did early on. When they were providing this service, she would meet with all the providers in the practice and remind them, don't forget about the diabetes self-management, education, and support. Don't forget about the professional and personal CGM. Now, once the providers saw the value, they were ecstatic. It was the seed planted in their mind. So they knew, hey, I remember the value of that professional or personal CGM for the person with diabetes and the care that they received. Constant reinforcement. I don't know about you, but this hits home with me is that reminder for that diabetes care and education specialist in that primary care office, reminding the providers and the staff, hey, friendly reminder, I'm here. Don't forget, refer patients to me. I'm here to help you in this provision of care, this team-based care. Now, the champions were certainly the physicians, as well as the diabetes care and education specialists, because they were boots on the ground level. And so they had to be champions for their service, as well as starting with that one physician champion and just growing that exponentially. Challenges, certainly awareness, having the patience and understanding that it's not a free service, and educating both providers and persons with diabetes the value of the service, but it's not a free service. Just like if you were to take your favorite canine friend or your cat to the vet, there's certainly not, it's not free services, and the values that we, services we receive in the healthcare system certainly aren't free. And then the growing of physician champions over time, finding those champions, building and hardwiring in them the CGM, and really embedding that in their practice. Success stories, a couple of great ones here from Lucille. The first one is actually from that initial physician champion that she had had. Now, this particular physician, he took great interest in caring for the people with diabetes that were under his care, and he prided himself in really providing excellent care. And there was an elderly lady who had diabetes, and her fasting glucose had been elevating and just slowly rising over time. And he was titrating her basal insulin and titrating it up and up, and felt, okay, we're addressing the hyperglycemia. Well, this sweet older lady wore a professional continuous glucose monitor, only to discover, he and the patient discovered, oh my goodness, she is actually having severe hypoglycemia nocturnally. So needless to say, backed off of the basal insulin and actually significantly reduced the dose to where now she wears very little. For that provider, that left a lasting impact in his mind of the value of that CGM, as well as for the older lady who was wearing the CGM. The second story is very warming and endearing as well. And there was recently an Italian gentleman who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and he had been told early on by some well-meaning folks that he couldn't have any of his favorite foods anymore. Now, I'm sure you can imagine your favorite foods and somebody telling you you can't have that anymore. And he basically felt like, how can I live like this? I can't do this. Well, there was actually a diabetes care and education specialist in his primary care provider's office, and he actually wore a professional CGM. And he actually learned that there were a lot of his cultural foods that he could actually still enjoy in different portion sizes. And he said, I didn't think I was going to be able to do this, but you gave me my life back. The technology had taken down a barrier for this gentleman, and now he can live a full life with type 2 diabetes. So from Lucille and Rhonda, words of wisdom for you all out there. Focus on CGM as a tool for patient confidence, just like the gentleman I just shared about. We want people with diabetes to feel empowered, to feel really good about themselves and their ability to manage their diabetes. And CGM is one of the tools that can help them do this. Second, from Lucille, bring in that person halfway through the time period that they're wearing that professional CGM to look and see what impact lifestyle factors, medications are having on their glucose. Set some goals around those lifestyle changes, then bring them back at the end of wearing the professional CGM. Let the person with diabetes know the cost upfront for professional CGM. One thing that Lucille and her team did is they actually included on the flyers, and Rhonda has as well, most insurance plans will cover the CGM, just so that folks know there is a cost involved. Market the CGM at the primary care provider level. Gain physician champions. Once they see the value, they will buy in. Find that one physician champion that folks trust, work with them, and then build it from there. And lastly, educate the primary care provider on CGM value in terms of patient satisfaction, its effectiveness, and how to interpret the data. The sky is truly the limit. And I challenge you, what is your action step going to be after listening to this webinar? Don't be afraid. Take the plunge into CGM for the patients you care for with diabetes. Thank you on behalf of my colleagues. I want to thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. And please complete the survey so we can get your valuable feedback. Thank you so much.